A single mom says to the billionaire, "My ex has a hairline just like yours." But what happened next shattered both their worlds. The clink of fine china and the hushed murmurs of Manhattan's elite filled the lavish dining room at the Azure Room. Louise Wilkinson, 27, stood behind the counter, serving the wealthy patrons as a waitress at one of the city's most exclusive spots. Her fingers trembled slightly as she carefully poured a glass of wine. The man sitting at the center of the table, Milton Peterson, was a figure of power and wealth, a billionaire whose reputation had made him an untouchable presence in the business world. He didn't even look up as she approached, too absorbed in his phone, the gleam of his expensive suit reflecting the dim chandelier light. Louise's eyes caught a glimpse of his face, but what truly stopped her in her tracks was the hairline. It was almost identical to her ex-husband James's, sharp and receding with the same distinctive peak. For a moment, her breath caught in her throat. The past she had worked so hard to forget seemed to come rushing back to her. She swallowed, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand, but the resemblance was too uncanny. Without thinking, she blurted out, "I'm sorry, sir, but my ex has a hairline just like yours." Milton's eyes snapped up to meet hers, cold, piercing, a stark contrast to the warmth of the room. The air shifted. It was as if everything around them went silent. And in that moment, Louise felt a sharp intensity in his gaze. She didn't know it yet, but that simple comment would unravel secrets neither of them were ready to face. The waiter's words echoed in the silence. And as Milton's face turned pale, the course of their lives was set on a collision course. What followed next would expose a family secret that neither could ignore. If you're wondering how a simple comment about a hairline could unravel a web of secrets, betrayals, and a family's buried past, don't go anywhere. Let me know where you're watching from. I would like to connect better with you all. Support us to make this story go viral. Like, share, and subscribe. And hit that notification bell because what happens next will leave you speechless. This is a story about vulnerability, forgiveness, and redemption. Stay with us because you won't believe what happens next. Milton stood up abruptly, his expression unreadable, and quietly placed a generous tip on the table. The click of the bills against the polished surface seemed louder than usual. He turned, walking away without another word, leaving Louise standing there, still holding the wine bottle. The tension hung in the air as she watched him leave, her mind racing. The encounter, once brief, felt far from ordinary, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a coincidence. For hours earlier, Louise had woken to the harsh beep of her alarm at 4:30 a.m. It was a familiar sound, one that had become part of her routine for the last 7 years. As she rubbed her eyes, the cold reality of her cramped studio apartment hit her again. The walls seemed to close in with each passing day. Her daughter, Ava, stirred softly in her crib just a few feet away, but it was the cough in the other room that reminded Louise of the bigger, more pressing concern. "Mom, you okay?" Louise called out to her mother, Martha, who had been ill for months. Martha's weak voice responded, "I'm fine, baby. You're going to be late." Louise could already hear the rustling of her mother's frail body trying to push herself out of bed. But she knew better. Her mom wasn't fine. She dressed quickly in her worn-out black waitress uniform, the fabric rough against her skin as she thought about the long shift ahead at the Azure Room. Tips were good at nights like this, but it never seemed to be enough. Every hour she worked was one less hour spent caring for her sick mother, one more hour lost in the struggle to survive. But Louise was used to this life. She'd always been used to sacrifice. And as she looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, she reminded herself, everything is for Ava. Louise stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, her mind still racing from the brief, unsettling encounter with Milton Peterson. She'd been a waitress long enough to know when something was off, when a moment held more weight than it appeared. But this was different. This was beyond just an awkward interaction. Something about it gnawed at her. What had I just done? She asked herself again as she smoothed down her uniform and checked the time. Ava would be waking soon, her little hands reaching for Louise, needing her. The warm, dim light of the bathroom made her look older than her 27 years. The sleepless nights, the constant worry about money, and the weight of her mother's illness. Every wrinkle on her face felt earned. The life she had chosen, or perhaps the one that had been thrust upon her, wasn't glamorous. But it was hers, and everything she did was for Ava. She turned off the light and stepped out into the small apartment, the familiar scent of old books and baby lotion filling the air. "Mommy's coming, baby," she whispered as she gently picked up Ava from her crib. The little girl yawned, her curly hair still soft from a long sleep. Louise kissed her forehead and held her close, trying to ground herself in this simple moment of peace. But even in the quiet, the memory of Milton's cold gaze haunted her. The next morning, the apartment felt stifling. It was barely 8 a.m., but the day already felt too long. Louise was on autopilot, making breakfast for Ava, checking her phone, and trying to ignore the feeling that she was being watched. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her stomach sank. It was a message from an unknown, blocked number. Her finger hovered over the screen before she opened it. It read, "We need to talk. Meet me at 3 p.m., 28th Street and 5th Avenue." A chill ran through her. She stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. What did Milton want with her? And why the cryptic message? Was this a business matter? Or was it something more personal? She rubbed her eyes and exhaled. She hadn't expected this. She thought the awkward encounter at the restaurant would be just that, awkward. But the intensity in his eyes as she spoke about her ex-husband had been unmistakable. It was as if her words had stirred something deep inside of him, something he didn't want to confront. And now, he was asking to meet again. But why? She stood up and walked over to the small kitchen counter where her purse was sitting. She had 1,000 thoughts running through her mind. If it was business, it could mean money, something she never turned down. But was this some sort of game? Was Milton trying to manipulate her, use her connection to James for some personal or professional gain? She didn't know him, and she had no reason to trust him. Should I even go? She thought. The idea of meeting a man like Milton, someone who could snap his fingers and change her life, made her uneasy. He was a billionaire, and she was Louise Wilkinson, the waitress from the wrong side of town. But something tugged at her. Curiosity, a desire for answers, the feeling that this wasn't just some coincidence. The hours between the text and the scheduled meeting felt like they dragged on. Louise spent her morning with Ava, trying to focus on the mundane details of motherhood. She read to her daughter, played with her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the message. The more she thought about it, the more she felt the pull to meet Milton. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the vague connection between him and her ex-husband. It was about that moment when she had stood before him and said those words. She couldn't shake the feeling that Milton knew something she didn't, something about James, about herself, maybe even about her future. The clock ticked by, and before she knew it, it was 2:30 p.m. She couldn't put it off any longer. With a sigh, she kissed Ava's forehead and told her, "Be good for Grandma." She grabbed her jacket, checked her purse one last time, and headed out the door. As she made her way down the narrow, cluttered hall of her building, she passed the old woman who lived next door, offering a quick smile. "Going to work?" the woman asked, raising an eyebrow. Louise nodded, not wanting to explain. "Yeah, just a quick errand." The city felt different today. The hustle of Manhattan, which usually filled her with anxiety, seemed oddly distant now. She walked briskly, her steps purposeful but light. As she neared 28th Street, her stomach fluttered with nerves. She had no idea what Milton wanted to talk about, but her curiosity was stronger than her doubts. The cafe was tucked away on the corner, a small, upscale place where tourists rarely ventured. When she stepped inside, the cool air hit her, and she glanced around. The low murmur of conversation filled the room, but it felt muffled, like a world she wasn't part of. There, sitting by the window with a glass of water in front of him, was Milton. His presence was just as imposing as it had been in the restaurant. He hadn't noticed her yet, but as she walked toward the table, his eyes flicked up, locking onto hers with that same intense gaze. "Miss Wilkinson," he said, his voice as smooth as ever, but with a hint of something else, something vulnerable, something human. Louise hesitated for a moment before sitting across from him. The space between them felt charged, like two magnets resisting each other but still drawn in. "So, what is it that you wanted to talk about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, even as the questions bubbled up inside her. Milton took a slow breath, his fingers tapping lightly on the glass. "I think we need to discuss your ex-husband, James." The tension in the air thickened as Milton leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing with something that resembled both caution and urgency. Louise's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary conversation. It wasn't about business or money. It was about something much deeper, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Have you ever had a moment where a simple comment turned everything upside down? What would you do if you were Louise, caught between curiosity and caution? Comment below and share your thoughts. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from and hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss what happens next. Stay tuned for more twists and turns in this thrilling journey. Louise sat across from Milton, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. The cafe, which had felt so foreign when she first entered, now felt suffocating. The low hum of quiet conversation seemed miles away, and the ticking of the clock on the wall echoed louder in her ears. Milton had just sat back in his chair, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of his glass, eyes locked onto hers. His usual confidence had slipped, replaced by something that felt like uncertainty, like he, too, was struggling to make sense of this moment. "I'm glad you came," Milton said, his voice steady but with an undertone of something deeper. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I didn't know what else to do," Louise replied, her voice hoarse. "You said you needed to talk about James. I don't even know where to start." Milton leaned forward, his gaze softening. "You don't need to know everything right now, Louise. But there's something I need to tell you. Something about your ex-husband and about—" The words hung between them, heavy and impenetrable. Louise felt a cold chill creeping up her spine. Milton cleared his throat, his hand trembling slightly as he took a sip from his glass. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully, as though unsure of how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke again. "James is more connected to my past than you could ever imagine," Milton continued, his voice low and measured. "In fact, he's the reason I'm sitting here today." Louise blinked, her mind racing. What was he talking about? She had no idea where this conversation was going, but the unease inside her was growing. She opened her mouth to respond, but Milton held up his hand. "You see, Louise, James and I, well, we weren't strangers. We had a business relationship years ago when we were both trying to make our way in the world. But things got complicated. A long time ago, James was involved with my ex-wife, Nora." Louise's stomach dropped. She had never heard this before, and the words felt like a slap to the face. James and Milton's wife? James was having an affair with Nora. Milton continued, his voice tight. "And when I found out, it wasn't just business that went south. It was everything. The affair caused a scandal that destroyed my marriage, my family. And it drove James away. After the confrontation, he disappeared, vanished. No one knew where he went, and no one could reach him. Not even you, I suppose." Louise was silent, the weight of his words settling in like a stone in her chest. Her ex-husband, the man who had abandoned her, had once been involved in a scandal that ruined Milton's life. And now, here was this billionaire, a man she had never dreamed of meeting, sitting across from her, telling her that James wasn't just some ex-husband with a bad history. He was the key to an ugly past, a past that neither of them had ever really dealt with. Milton paused, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of his glass. Louise could feel the silent stretch between them, filling the space with a thick, uncomfortable tension. "You see," Milton said, his voice quieter now, "I tried to find James after that. I spent years looking for him, trying to make amends, trying to understand. But it was as if he vanished from the earth. And then, when I finally stopped looking, I found out something I wasn't prepared for." He looked at her, his eyes dark with something close to regret. "I found out that James had a daughter. Your daughter, Louise." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her breath caught in her throat, and she felt a dizzying rush of emotions flood her mind. "What? I don't understand," Louise whispered. "Ava, you think James is her father?" Milton nodded slowly, his expression hardening. "I'm not sure, but the timing, the details, it's too much of a coincidence. I didn't know about Ava until recently, and I've been hesitant to bring this up, but I think there's a strong chance that she could be my granddaughter." Louise stared at him, her world suddenly spinning. She had never considered the possibility that Ava's father could be anyone other than James. But now, here was Milton, a man she barely knew, telling her that the father of her child might not just be a man who'd left them both behind, but also the person responsible for a past that had been buried so deep it had shaped both of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. She could feel the bile rising in her throat. A granddaughter? Her mind raced, but no words came out. She wanted to ask questions, wanted to scream at him, but her body felt like it was paralyzed by shock. Milton shifted in his seat, his voice growing softer. "I'm not asking you to believe me, Louise, but I think you deserve to know the truth about your past, the truth about your daughter." I don't know what to say," Louise stammered. She felt like she couldn't breathe. "You can't just drop something like that on me. Ava's father is James. Not you. Not anyone else." Milton didn't respond immediately, his eyes still locked on hers. He wasn't pushing. He was waiting for her to absorb it, to process it in her own way. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said quietly, "but I wanted to tell you. I wanted you to have all the information. You deserve to know, especially if this is something that's going to affect your daughter's future." Louise closed her eyes for a moment, the words spinning in her head. The idea that Ava might be connected to this man in some way, the man who had caused so much pain, was almost too much to bear. But she couldn't deny it. There was a truth in Milton's words, one that pulled at her gut. This wasn't just about her or about James. This was about a future that was bigger than she had ever imagined. Her eyes snapped open, and she met Milton's gaze. "What now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What am I supposed to do with all of this?" Milton sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I can't answer that for you, Louise, but I can help if you want me to." Louise stood up, her legs weak beneath her. The weight of everything Milton had just revealed pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She had come here looking for answers, but now she wasn't sure what to believe anymore. She had to leave. She needed time to process it all. As she walked out of the cafe, the city outside felt like a blur. The noise, the bustle, the millions of people passing by, none of it seemed real. Her mind was consumed with one question. What now? What would you do if you were in Louise's shoes, facing a truth that could change everything? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated, because this story is far from over. As Louise stepped out of the cafe, the cool air hit her face like a slap, grounding her momentarily. The sounds of the city, honking cars, people laughing, footsteps, felt distant, like she was in a dream. Her mind swirled with the revelation Milton had just dropped on her, and her body seemed to carry the weight of the secret he had shared. Ava could be his granddaughter. The words echoed in her head, drowning out everything else. She had heard them, understood them, but they didn't seem real. They couldn't be real. She walked aimlessly for a few blocks, unsure of where she was going. The city's constant hum was muted, her thoughts the only thing loud in her mind. Was this some twisted game? A way for Milton to control her, to get under her skin? Or had she just been given a glimpse into a past she never knew existed? Louise's hands were shaking as she reached for her phone. She needed to hear a familiar voice. A voice that wasn't connected to secrets and lies. She called her mother, Martha, who had been quiet all morning, lost in the depths of her illness. The phone rang twice before Martha picked up. "Hello, sweetheart." Her mother's voice sounded weak but comforting. "Hey, Mom," Louise replied, trying to steady her voice. "I'm just taking a walk. How are you feeling?" "Better," Martha said, though Louise could hear the fatigue in her words. "Are you all right?" Louise paused, leaning against a nearby building as her stomach churned. She hadn't told her mother about the meeting with Milton yet. She hadn't known how. It felt too overwhelming, too unreal. "I'm okay, Mom," she lied. "I'll be home soon." When Louise finally returned to the apartment, she found Martha lying on the couch, eyes closed, the weight of her sickness still evident in her frail body. Ava was asleep in her crib, the soft rise and fall of her chest a calming reminder of what truly mattered. Louise walked over to her daughter's crib and gently touched her small hand, the familiar comfort of Ava's warmth easing some of the tension in her chest. But then her phone buzzed again. She picked it up and saw that it was a message from Milton. Her pulse quickened as she read the text. "Louise, I know this is a lot to take in. I want to help you. I suggest we take a DNA test to confirm what I've said. It's the only way to move forward." A DNA test. Her stomach flipped. Part of her wanted to dismiss the idea, wanted to believe this was all a coincidence. That maybe Milton was overstepping, manipulating her, trying to worm his way into her life. But another part, the part that wanted answers, the part that couldn't ignore the strange connection between her daughter and this man, knew it was the only way. Milton was offering a path forward, but did she really want to know the truth? Louise spent the rest of the afternoon pacing her tiny apartment, caught in a whirlwind of doubt and fear. The possibility that Ava could be connected to this man, who had so much power and wealth, terrified her. What would that mean for her daughter? For her? As she sat on the couch, a deep sense of conflict gnawed at her. She had always worked so hard to protect Ava from the world. She had tried to shield her from the complications of her past, from the mess of her failed marriage with James. She had worked tirelessly to give Ava a life that was free from the chaos of her own mistakes. But now, that very past was knocking at her door. Could Milton be right? She wondered. Could Ava really be his granddaughter? The thought made her feel sick. But at the same time, she couldn't shake the curiosity. The need for answers was like a weight pressing on her chest. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Ava stirring in her crib. Louise stood up quickly, walked over to her daughter, and gently picked her up. Holding Ava close, Louise closed her eyes, letting the calm rhythm of her daughter's breathing soothe her for a moment. But the moment was fleeting. What am I supposed to do? Louise wondered, her fingers tightening around Ava. How do I protect her from this? The next morning, Louise found herself standing outside a small clinic on the edge of the city. She had decided to go ahead with the DNA test. It was the only way to know the truth, and part of her needed that. Needed to know once and for all whether the man who had shaken her world apart was truly part of her daughter's life. She clutched her purse tightly in her hands, the weight of the decision heavy on her chest. She had told no one about her plans. Not her mother, not even Ava's father, who had long since disappeared from their lives. Louise stepped inside the clinic, a small room with soft lighting and sterile white walls. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile, and she handed over her identification and Ava's details, trying to keep her nerves in check. The waiting room was quiet, and Louise felt herself slipping into a daze. She could barely focus on the brochures or the distant chatter of other patients. All she could think about was Milton's words. Was this test really the right thing to do? Could she trust him? After a few moments, she was called into the back. A nurse took a small blood sample from Ava, who barely stirred during the process. Louise's heart ached watching her daughter, so innocent, caught in the middle of a storm she couldn't control. As they finished, the nurse gave her a reassuring smile. You'll have the results in a few days. It's routine, nothing to worry about. But Louise couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Whether the test proved Milton's claim true or false, her life, and Ava's, would never be the same again. As Louise left the clinic, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every step felt heavy, every sound around her distant. She had done it. The test was on its way, and the truth would soon be out. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but it was happening. She glanced at her phone as she walked down the street. A message from Milton flashing across the screen. I know this is difficult, but you're doing the right thing. I'm here if you need anything. But was she doing the right thing? Would this test give her the answer she wanted, or would it tear everything apart? The city buzzed around her, but for the first time, Louise felt truly alone. The results of the DNA test were days away, but the weight of that uncertainty already hung over her like a dark cloud. Would she be ready to face the truth? What would you do if you were in Louise's shoes? Take the test, or walk away from the truth? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on this thrilling journey. The days between the DNA test and the impending results crawled by, each minute stretching into what felt like an eternity. Louise couldn't escape the weight of the uncertainty that clung to her. Every small moment of silence seemed louder now, every glance at her phone more urgent. Was Milton telling the truth? Could it be possible that Ava's father wasn't just James, but a man who, until now, had been a stranger to her? Louise tried to go on with her routine. She took Ava to the park, ran errands, worked her shifts. But everything felt off. Every conversation she had, every task she completed, was clouded by the nagging question that refused to leave her mind. What would the results say? Then, one afternoon, after she had tucked Ava into bed, her phone buzzed with an unexpected message. Louise, I know this is difficult, but I would like to speak with you about the test results. Please meet me at my office tomorrow. It's time we talked. Milton. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. The results hadn't come in yet, but Milton was already making plans to meet. Was this a sign that the results were in, or was he just pushing for answers of his own? She didn't have time to think much about it. She had agreed to meet him once before, and she had to do it again. For the sake of the truth, for Ava's future. The next morning, Louise found herself standing outside a sleek office building in Midtown Manhattan, its glass facade gleaming in the sunlight like some foreign world she had never been a part of. The building looked like it belonged to someone powerful, someone who could control things with a snap of their fingers. Milton had asked her to meet him at his office, but she hadn't been prepared for this kind of setting. She had worked in Manhattan for years, seen the suits and the power players, but this was another world entirely. As she stepped inside, she felt the weight of her decision. This was where her life had collided with Milton's, where secrets and mysteries had been uncovered. And now, this was where it would all come to a head. A well-dressed receptionist greeted her with a polite smile and directed her to Milton's office. Louise's palms were sweating, her nerves threatening to take over. The closer she got to the door, the more she questioned everything. What was he going to say? What did he really want? Milton's office was just as imposing as the building. Dark mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, and a desk so large it seemed like a throne for a king. But even in this grandeur, Milton sat behind it, a solitary figure, his face a mask of quiet determination. Louise. He greeted her, standing to offer a hand. Thank you for coming. Please sit. She did, taking the chair across from him, her posture tense and defensive. Milton wasted no time in getting to the point. I assume you're wondering why I asked you here, he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. The DNA results came in this morning. Louise's heart raced. So it was true. They had the results. What now? He looked at her, his eyes betraying a hint of vulnerability. I know this isn't easy for you, for either of us, but I need to say this. I want to be involved in Ava's life, Louise. Louise recoiled slightly, surprised by the bluntness of his words. Why? After all these years, why now? She asked, her voice edged with suspicion. Milton leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk as he studied her. I've spent too long running from the past. I've spent my life building a legacy, a business, a reputation. But it's all been meaningless without the truth. Without understanding where I come from, what happened, and what I've lost. I've lost years, Louise. I can't change that, but I want to make things right. Louise felt a lump in her throat. The power and wealth he spoke of were so far removed from her reality. She had spent years scraping by, working herself to the bone just to keep her head above water. But here, in front of her, was a man who could offer everything, a life for Ava that Louise could never dream of. The temptation was there, but so was her caution. She folded her arms, meeting his gaze. I'm not going to let you walk into Ava's life and take over Milton. I don't know you, and I don't know what your intentions are. Milton's jaw tightened, and for the first time, he looked a little shaken. I understand, and I'm not asking for you to hand over your daughter to me. I just want the chance to be a part of her life, if she'll let me. If you'll let me. Louise sat back, her mind spinning. The weight of his words sank in. Could she really trust him? Could she let Ava be a part of this man's world? But she wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about Ava, about what was best for her, what was best for their future. The room fell silent as Louise struggled with the torrent of emotions. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, never relying on anyone, certainly not someone like Milton Peterson. But here he was, offering something she had always wanted, stability for her daughter, a future without the constant worry of surviving from paycheck to paycheck. I don't know if I can trust you, Louise said finally, her voice shaking slightly. You were part of my past, but you were never there for us. For me. For Ava. Milton's expression softened, and his eyes darkened with regret. I've made mistakes, Louise. Huge ones. I can't undo them, but I can try to do better now. I don't want to push you or your daughter, but I want to be a part of her life. I'm not asking you to hand her over. I'm asking for a chance. There it was. The vulnerability in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes. It was hard to ignore. She had always believed that family was more than blood, but this was different. Milton wasn't offering money. He wasn't asking for anything except a place in Ava's life. And maybe, just maybe, that was something she could give him. Louise stood up, her mind swirling. The decision was heavy, more than she could carry alone. She looked at Milton one last time before leaving the office. As she stepped into the elevator, she couldn't help but wonder, was she making the right choice? Would she let him into their lives, or would she shut him out, keeping the past buried where it belonged? The future was as uncertain as the past, but one thing was for sure. She wasn't the same person who had walked into Milton's office an hour ago. What would you do if you were Louise? Let Milton into Ava's life, or keep him at a distance? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more twists in this story. The quiet hum of the city filled the air around Louise as she left Milton's office. The weight of their conversation lingered with her, wrapping around her chest like an iron band. Her mind was a blur of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to shut Milton out completely, to return to the life she knew, the life she had built without him. But another part of her, the part that had always dreamed of a different future for Ava, couldn't completely dismiss his offer. He wanted to be part of their lives. He had regrets, he said. He wanted to atone for his past mistakes. But could he? Could she? Her footsteps were heavy as she walked toward her apartment, the noise of the city pushing against her senses. The idea of a new beginning felt both thrilling and terrifying, like stepping into a storm without knowing if it would sweep her away or leave her stranded. That evening, as she sat on the couch with Ava in her lap, Louise's thoughts circled back to Milton's words. I want to make things right. He had said that over and over, as though redemption could somehow erase the years of silence, the mistakes that had been made. The next day, Milton called. He wanted to meet again. This time, though, he had asked her to come to his home, something he said he preferred to do in person. Louise hesitated for a moment. She didn't know what to expect this time, but part of her knew she had to face it to hear more of the truth. The part of her that was still searching for answers, still yearning for something different. When she arrived at Milton's house, the contrast between his world and hers was even more apparent. The mansion was located in a quiet, upscale neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, nestled among towering trees and perfectly manicured lawns. The house itself was grand, with sweeping stone steps leading up to a set of large wooden doors. Louise felt a wave of discomfort wash over her as she stepped inside. The smell of fresh flowers filled the entryway, and everything was meticulously designed, from the furniture to the art on the walls. It was a far cry from her cramped apartment, the life she had carved out with determination and grit. But she pushed those thoughts aside as she stepped further into the house, feeling the heat of anticipation in her chest. Milton was waiting for her in a large sitting room, the kind of room meant for entertaining, with deep leather chairs and a large fireplace. His expression was one of quiet expectation, as though he knew this meeting was crucial, just as much to him as it was to her. I know this must be overwhelming, he said, motioning for her to sit. But I need to explain things more fully. About James, about the history we share. Louise nodded slowly, taking the seat across from him. She was used to his directness, but now, in this space, everything felt more personal. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He wasn't just the man who had the potential to change her daughter's life. He was a man with a past, and that past was tangled up in her own. Milton took a deep breath and began. James and I didn't just work together. We were friends at one point. When we were younger, we shared a vision. We wanted to change the world. But we were both too driven, too eager to succeed, and I lost sight of everything else, including Nora, my ex-wife. Louise frowned, her heart racing as the pieces of the story started to fall into place. You were friends with James? She asked, her voice betraying her disbelief. She had never imagined a connection like this. And you were involved with his wife? Milton's eyes darkened with regret. Yes, Nora and I were in a tumultuous relationship. I thought it was over when she and James became involved, but the damage had already been done. James didn't just disappear after the affair. He left the business, left me, and walked away from his family, including you and Ava. I thought I had lost him to the scandal, but I never realized he had cut himself off from everything. Louise's chest tightened as she listened. It was more than just a professional falling out. It was personal, and the idea that her ex-husband, the man who had walked away from them both, had been caught up in something so deep, something that involved Milton's own broken marriage, made her feel nauseous. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Louise's voice was sharp, though she was careful to keep the emotion in check. Why keep it hidden for so long? Why burn it up now? Milton's face softened. Because I needed to make things right. I can't undo the years of silence between us, but I can try to fix the damage that was done. I know it's not enough, but I want to help you and Ava. His words hung in the air, a plea for forgiveness, an offer of redemption. But Louise wasn't sure if she was ready to accept it. Could he really make things right? Could anyone after all this time? The conversation shifted as Milton moved to another topic, Ava's future. I know I can't replace James, but I want to be there for her. I want to support her education, her future, everything. I've made my fortune, and I want to use it for something good. Louise's heart raced at the mention of Ava's future. The offer sounded tempting, almost too good to be true. She had struggled for so long, and the idea of giving Ava opportunities she never had was something that tugged at her. But something inside her recoiled. She didn't want money to replace love and care. I don't want your money, Louise said, her voice steady, though her insides twisted with uncertainty. I want Ava to have a better life, yes. But I don't want her to feel like she owes anyone anything. I want her to grow up with love, not with strings attached. Milton nodded slowly, as though he had anticipated her response. I understand. I'm not asking for her to owe me anything, Louise. I'm asking for the chance to be a part of her life, to help her in any way that I can. The room fell silent, and Louise's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. She didn't know what the right decision was. She didn't know if she could trust Milton, if she could let him into their lives. But one thing was clear. This was a turning point, one way or another. Louise stood up, her thoughts clouded, her heart heavy. I need some time to think, she said quietly, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt. As she left Milton's home, the weight of his words pressed against her chest, but the questions only grew louder. Was she making the right decision for Ava and for herself? The future was uncertain, and the past was a tangled web she wasn't sure she could ever untangle. But the only way forward was to face it, no matter what. If you were Louise, would you accept Milton's help or walk away to protect your peace? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in this story. The days that followed were quieter but filled with uncertainty. Louise couldn't stop thinking about Milton's words, about the sincerity in his voice when he said he wanted to make things right. She had spent years building walls around her life, protecting Ava from anyone who might bring instability or disappointment. And now, suddenly, she was faced with the possibility that this man, this billionaire who had once been part of the pain she'd worked so hard to forget, might genuinely want to be part of her daughter's future. At first, she tried to keep her distance. She avoided his calls for days, even weeks, trying to convince herself that she could handle things on her own. But the truth was, Milton didn't give up easily. He reached out gently, never pushing, always offering. A message here, a check-in there. His persistence wasn't arrogant or invasive. It was careful, measured, patient. Eventually, Louise relented. Their first few interactions after that were awkward. Milton had invited her and Ava to a family outing in Central Park. A small gesture, something simple. Louise had almost declined, but she saw how Ava's face lit up at the mention of the park, and she couldn't say no. When they arrived, Milton was already there, standing near a bench with a bag of popcorn and a kite. Ava took to him faster than Louise expected. She was naturally curious, drawn to his calm, kind demeanor. Milton, for his part, seemed unsure at first, as though afraid to overstep. But when Ava tugged on his sleeve and asked him to help her fly the kite, his expression softened into something that almost looked like peace. Louise stood off to the side, watching them. The kite soared high against the bright afternoon sky, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a strange sense of quiet, like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't such a terrible thing. Over the next few months, Milton became a consistent presence in their lives. He didn't try to take over. Instead, he learned how to fit in. He'd stop by every few weeks with small gifts for Ava, books, art supplies, sometimes just flowers. Nothing extravagant, nothing that felt like he was trying to buy affection. He offered to help with her schooling. And though Louise resisted at first, she eventually agreed to let him pay for a specialized reading program Ava needed. The difference it made was undeniable. Ava was happier, more confident, and Louise couldn't ignore that Milton's involvement had played a part in that change. There were moments when it all felt surreal. She'd catch herself smiling at his text messages, small updates about how he'd found a new children's book for Ava or a new park they could explore next weekend. She didn't trust him completely, not yet, but she couldn't deny that he was trying. Still, there were boundaries. Louise made sure to set them early and clearly. Milton respected them, never crossing the line. When he offered to pay for more, her rent, her mother's medical bills, she refused, reminding him that she wanted help for Ava, not herself. Their relationship began to take on a rhythm, one that was cautious but genuine. Milton would visit them on Sundays, often bringing pastries or coffee from one of his favorite bakeries. He'd sit at the kitchen table, telling stories from his youth, carefully steering clear of the darker parts of his past. Sometimes he'd laugh, a deep, warm sound that filled the apartment. And sometimes, when Ava wasn't looking, Louise caught glimpses of something else in him. Regret, maybe, or gratitude. It was hard to tell, but she understood it, because in her own way, she carried those same emotions. One rainy afternoon, Milton stopped by unannounced, holding a large umbrella and a small gift bag. Louise raised an eyebrow when she opened the door, surprised to see him standing there drenched. "I know it's unexpected," he said, his voice light but uncertain. "But I was passing by and thought Ava might like this." Inside the bag was a small, framed photo of a tree they had planted together during one of their outings a few weeks earlier. Milton had taken the picture himself, and at the bottom of the frame, he'd engraved a small inscription, "For New Beginnings." Louise's chest tightened. It was a simple gesture, but it carried so much meaning. "She'll love it," she said softly, her voice almost breaking. Milton nodded, his eyes meeting hers for a long moment. There was no pretense there, no hidden motive, just sincerity. "Thank you for letting me be part of her life," he said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." Louise didn't know how to respond. Gratitude wasn't something she was used to hearing from men like Milton, men who had everything but rarely said words like thank you. It was disarming. As the months went on, things slowly shifted. The tension between them began to ease, replaced by an understanding built on small acts of trust. Milton learned when to step back, when to offer help, and when to simply listen. Louise, for her part, learned to accept that maybe people could change, that even the most broken relationships could find new forms of healing. She never stopped being cautious, though. Every step forward was deliberate, and every decision was weighed against her instinct to protect Ava. But she couldn't deny the truth anymore. Milton had become part of their lives, and not in a way that felt forced. It was Ava who sealed it one evening when she looked up at Milton and said, "You know, you kind of remind me of Grandpa from the stories Mommy tells me." Milton's eyes softened as he smiled. "Is that so?" Louise watched the exchange quietly, her heart caught between fear and warmth. For the first time in years, she saw her daughter laugh with someone other than herself or her mother. And in that moment, she realized that maybe Milton wasn't trying to replace anyone. Maybe he was just trying to belong. That night, after Milton left, Louise stood by the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. The city lights blurred in the distance, and for once, she didn't feel so alone. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something like hope. Milton was part of their world now, carefully, cautiously, but genuinely. And as she looked at the framed photo of the tree on the mantel, she whispered to herself, "Everything is still for Ava." But this time, it didn't sound like a burden. It sounded like a promise. Do you believe people like Milton can truly change and make amends for their past? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in this heartfelt story. The days that followed brought a calm that Louise hadn't felt in years. Her routine was lighter now. Her mornings were filled with the sound of Ava's laughter and the smell of coffee brewing in their tiny kitchen. And though life was far from perfect, there was a new sense of balance. Milton had become a steady presence, always respectful, always patient. But peace, Louise had learned, was fragile. It took only one moment, one decision to crack it. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning in late spring. The sun was warm through the windows, casting soft golden patterns on the floor as Ava sat cross-legged in the living room, coloring in a book Milton had given her the week before. Louise was folding laundry nearby when a knock came at the door. When she opened it, a delivery man stood there holding a large, ribbon-wrapped box, far too elegant for their small apartment. "Delivery for Ava Wilkinson," he said, smiling as he handed her a clipboard to sign. Louise blinked in confusion. Are you sure? Who's it from? There's a note attached, the man said before turning to leave. Louise closed the door and set the box on the table, staring at it with a growing sense of unease. The handwriting on the note was unmistakable, Milton's. She untied the ribbon, peeled back the layers of expensive wrapping paper, and froze. Inside was a brand new tablet, one of the latest models, sleek and gleaming. It came with accessories, a protective case, and even a small envelope that contained what looked like a bank card. Louise's pulse quickened as she opened the card. For Ava's future, so she can learn, create, and dream without limits. Her stomach turned. It wasn't the gift itself that bothered her. It was the message behind it. Ava was 6 years old. She didn't need a $1,000 tablet. What she needed was time, consistency, love. Milton had promised her that he wouldn't try to buy their affection. And yet, here it was, a gesture that felt too extravagant, too much, too soon. Ava's small voice broke through her thoughts. Mommy, who's it from? Louise forced a smile. It's from Milton. Her daughter's face lit up. Wow. He said he'd give me something special for my drawings. Can I try it? Louise hesitated, torn between wanting to see her daughter happy and the need to draw a line. Not yet, sweetie. Let Mommy check it first, okay? She waited until Ava was back on the floor, focused on her crayons, before picking up her phone and dialing Milton's number. He answered after only a few rings. Louise. His voice came warm, steady. I was just about to call. Did you get the delivery? Yes, she said, trying to keep her tone calm, but there was an edge to it she couldn't hide. I did. Milton, why would you send her something like that? A tablet? She's 6. There was a pause on the other end. I wanted to do something nice for her. She loves art, and I thought it might help her learn more, explore her creativity. Help her, Louise repeated, her voice sharper now. You think buying expensive gifts is helping her? We talked about this. You said you'd respect my boundaries. Milton sighed softly. Louise, it wasn't meant to upset you. I just wanted to make things right, she cut in. Because this isn't how you do it. You can't just throw money at my daughter and call it love. Her words hung in the air like broken glass, sharp and cutting. There was silence for a moment, and Louise almost regretted how harsh she'd sounded, but the frustration in her chest was too much to hold back. Milton, she continued, her voice trembling slightly now, I've worked my whole life to give Ava stability, even when it meant scraping by. She doesn't need you to buy her happiness. She needs to know that people show up for her, not shower her with gifts. When Milton finally spoke again, his voice was low, pained. You're right. Louise blinked. What? You're right, he repeated. I've been trying too hard. I thought that if I gave her things, if I gave you things, it might somehow make up for the years I lost. But I see now that I've been wrong. His honesty caught her off guard. There was no defensiveness, no excuse, just a man facing his own flaws. I don't want to buy my way into your lives, Milton continued. I don't know how to be part of something real anymore. I've spent decades building empires, not relationships. I'm learning, Louise. I just don't want to lose the chance to do this right. Louise felt the tightness in her chest begin to ease just slightly. She sat down at the kitchen table, looking at the expensive box in front of her. Milton, you don't have to prove yourself with things. You've already done enough by showing up. Just keep being there. That's what matters to me and to her. I understand, Milton said quietly. Thank you for reminding me. Later that evening, Louise called Milton again. She didn't want the tension between them to linger, and despite her earlier anger, she knew he hadn't meant harm. When he answered, she said softly, I think Ava can keep the tablet, but only if it's for learning. No games, no extravagance. Milton chuckled lightly on the other end. Deal. I'll even download a few educational apps myself. Louise smiled despite herself. You don't have to. I know, he said gently. But I want to. Not because it's about money, but because it's about effort. I want to earn your trust, Louise. Both of you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It was calm, warm, and full of understanding. Over the next few weeks, the air between them shifted. Milton started showing his care in smaller, more meaningful ways. He'd pick Ava up from school once a week and help her with her homework. Sometimes, he'd just drop by with groceries or spend the afternoon reading to her. He stopped talking about money altogether, focusing instead on moments that mattered. Louise noticed the difference, and slowly, cautiously, she began to let her guard down. One afternoon, as Milton helped Ava build a small model airplane at the kitchen table, Louise stood in the doorway watching them. The laughter that filled the room was easy, natural, and real. For the first time in a long while, she didn't see a billionaire trying to fix his past. She saw a man trying to build something new, something honest. That night, as Louise tucked Ava into bed, she thought about Milton's words. "I want to earn your trust." Trust, she realized, wasn't something given. It was built moment by moment, choice by choice. And maybe, just maybe, they were finally on their way there. Would you forgive someone who once hurt your family if they showed true change? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to see how this story of redemption unfolds next. The air was crisp, the sky painted in soft hues of gold and lavender as the sun began its slow descent behind the Manhattan skyline. It was one of those rare evenings where everything seemed to pause. The noise of the city softened, the wind gentle enough to carry the laughter of children from the nearby playground. Louise watched Ava run ahead, her tiny legs kicking up leaves as she chased a pigeon across the park lawn. Milton followed a few steps behind, carrying a wicker picnic basket in one hand and a folded blanket in the other. His presence, once intimidating, now felt natural, like a steady rhythm that had slowly found its place in their lives. They had chosen this park deliberately. It wasn't far from Louise's apartment, a familiar spot where she and Ava had spent countless afternoons together. But today was different. Today, Milton was part of that picture too. "Over here," Ava called out, waving from under a tree whose branches spread wide like open arms. Louise smiled, helping Milton spread the blanket on the grass. They unpacked the food, simple, nothing extravagant. Sandwiches, fruit, and a homemade cake that Milton had insisted on baking himself. The sight of him in an apron earlier that afternoon had made Louise laugh for the first time in weeks. He'd been hopeless with the frosting, but proud of his effort nonetheless. As they sat down, Milton poured lemonade into paper cups and handed one to Louise. "To new beginnings," he said quietly, raising his cup. She met his gaze and nodded. "To new beginnings." Ava giggled and clinked her cup against theirs before taking a long sip, the way only a child could make something so simple feel joyful. For a few moments, they ate in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled, because for once it didn't feel heavy. Louise glanced at Milton as he listened to Ava describe her latest art project. He looked genuinely at peace. The deep lines of stress that once carved his face now softened by something warmer. There was still a weight in his eyes, a quiet awareness of all he'd lost and the time he couldn't get back, but it no longer defined him. She could see the effort he had put in over the past months. The way he showed up for Ava's school presentations. The way he kept his promises. The way he respected Louise's boundaries while still being present. He had become more than just a benefactor or a figure from the past. He had become someone they could depend on. "Mommy, guess what?" Ava's voice pulled Louise from her thoughts. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Mr. Milton said he used to be scared of drawing when he was little," she said, grinning as she looked at him. Milton chuckled, a hint of embarrassment in his tone. "It's true. I wasn't very good at it." Louise smiled. "So what changed?" Milton leaned back, the fading sunlight catching the silver in his hair. "I realized that it wasn't about being perfect. It was about trying, about not being afraid to make mistakes." Their eyes met briefly, And in that moment, Louise understood that he wasn't just talking about drawing. After dinner, they packed away the food and sat watching the city lights flicker to life in the distance. The hum of traffic mingled with the rustle of leaves, creating a melody that felt strangely comforting. Milton glanced at Louise, his voice soft but sure. You know, I used to think family was about having the right last name, the right legacy. I thought money could fix everything. But now I know it's about showing up, about staying, even when it's hard. Louise nodded slowly. I used to think the same thing, about love at least, that it had to be perfect or it wasn't real. But life doesn't work that way. It's messy, it's complicated, and sometimes it's exactly what you need. Milton smiled faintly. You've taught me more about family than I ever learned growing up. Louise felt her chest tighten with emotion, but she didn't look away. There was no need for grand speeches between them. The truth was in the small moments, the shared laughter, the quiet understanding, the trust that had been rebuilt piece by piece. Ava climbed into Louise's lap, yawning. Can we do this again next weekend? Louise kissed the top of her head. We'll see, baby. Milton smiled. I think we can make that happen. As the evening grew cooler, they began packing up their things. Milton folded the blanket neatly, while Louise helped Ava gather her crayons and sketchbook. Before they left, Ava ran back to the tree and placed a small drawing at its base, a simple picture of the three of them, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. For good luck, she said proudly. Milton crouched beside her, looking at the drawing. His eyes glistened slightly. It's perfect, he whispered. Louise watched them, her heart full. It wasn't the kind of family she had once imagined, but maybe that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were here, together, learning how to move forward. As they walked back toward the park's entrance, the path illuminated by soft lamplight, Louise found herself reflecting on everything that had brought them to this point. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak. It was all still there somewhere deep inside, but it no longer controlled her. She glanced at Milton, who was holding Ava's hand as they walked ahead. He wasn't a perfect man. He carried his flaws like old scars, visible but healed. Yet, in the quiet steadiness of his steps, she saw the man he was trying to become, the man who had learned, at last, what truly mattered. For years, Louise had thought her story was one of struggle and survival. But now, she realized it was also a story of grace, of letting go, forgiving, and beginning again. As they reached the edge of the park, Milton turned to her. Thank you, Louise, he said softly, for giving me a chance. She smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep within. Thank you for earning it. Ava tugged on both their hands. Come on, slowpokes. They laughed, following her down the sidewalk, their shadows stretching out long behind them under the streetlights. The city buzzed around them, alive and endless, and for the first time in a long while, Louise didn't feel small within it. She felt free. They weren't perfect. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was enough. Do you believe family is defined by blood or by the people who choose to show up for you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of love, redemption, and second chances.